Bob was going to talk about the next slide, next two slides, actually.
Okay, is this on?
It's on. I think it's on.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. This one was prepared especially for Chair Eisenberg because he's always enjoying my attempts at graphically depicting problems.
And I'm also used to your flying from the clouds down through the delta in a zoom, which I mercifully did not see in this report.
We're going to move to a chapter-by-chapter discussion, but before we do, I wanted to put forth these sort of four dimensions of all plans. Because as Chair pointed out in reviewing our draft material, that the comments, the hundreds of comments, can be boiled down, most of them, to whether you're going to exercise your authority definitively or you're going to devolve or defer or delegate. That's true, but I'm looking for...
Or decide we have no authority.
Exactly. And I wanted to look for more nuanced responses to those charges. So on the top here, we have on the left advisory collaborative, and Chapter 8, the Delta as Evolving Place, is very much in that camp, okay, because very little is being done here on that. And definitive enforceable would be where you've adopted a firm policy and that you, the council, will enforce it. And so let's say there's a challenge to this. You can just slide to the left, and that may do away with the controversy. Or you could go down and say, well, wait a minute, here, the plan can be a process as opposed to a fixed master plan having made all the decisions. So you would reserve your authority, but you would say, we're going to take time to do this, we're going to have public hearings, we're going to hear testimony, and we'll sooner or later get to a more definitive answer. But for right now, we're sliding over to the left and treat it more as a process. Or a number of the comments were of the type that would say, we don't think you have the authority to do this. But then the next sentence would be, but if you do exert that authority, we wish you would do it in the following way. In other words, please hold until DWR finishes its work or the flood people finish theirs or whatever. And I thought those were a kind of a nuanced concept. That is, they're assuming you are going to someday exert your authority, but they're pleading with you to hold off until more and better information comes in, which they see to their advantage. And so as you see in the center here, I put all the chapters, by my view, as to where they sit. And in the bottom, professional practice versus management versus a science-based, rational, comprehensive planning approach. And each, as you see, Chapter 2 is way over on the right because it's heavily science-based, but it has almost no professional practice in how to get it done in management.
I didn't actually understand what you meant by professional practice.
Okay. That would be the agencies and people like Nature Conservancy or whatever. In other words, they have a body of professional work that goes on. There's some science, but really they're hiring professionals to work without starting over from a rational, comprehensive view. And so by professional and incremental solving the problem pretty much the way they solved the problems in the past, as opposed to the science board saying, identify all your uncertainties and make a sweeping change.
Is this deference to interest group, other governments? I mean, the titles just don't.
Okay,
they don't explain. If on one side is what I think is an emphasis on science, and of course our statute has language on that. It's not the anti-science. It's a different approach, and I still can't grasp what it is.
Yeah, well, I'll have to work on it. But what I'm aiming at here is that, for example, engineering, what engineers learn in civil engineering and their body of experience in building bridges or levees.
Is it then deference to locally or regionally determined professional judgments, scientific engineering and so on?
Yes.
As opposed to, when you say science-based on the right, that is what?
Well, you would do a kind of a review of the problem, bring in the scientists, and they're always going to come up with new ideas and throw into question a lot of these engineering protocols and so on. Mm-hmm. And so it's a different kind of planning. But obviously this It should have been parsed because science and rational comprehensive aren't the same, right? So we could have more.
Yeah, I thought the first three graphs were, to me, they were understandable. This last one I'm interested in, but I can't get my hands on it yet.
Yeah.
It may need some
And
more
obviously
work. But frankly, I found it kind of interesting to see your judgment on an array of where these things fall.
Okay.
Well, if I could just get in, this I understand, I hear the confusion, but a place that this would be valuable to address is as you think about adaptive management and how the adaptive management process is structured. Sometimes if the adaptive management process is solely the province of a group of credentialed scientists and engineers with no participation by the agency staff or people on the ground who are living in lives in, let's say, the Delta, or working to get water conservation on the ground, that'll be a very different adaptive management process than if you develop an adaptive management process that tries to meld those two. The melding of the two is frequently advocated, and I'm an advocate of that. There are ways to structure it, but it requires careful design, and it is not necessarily an easy process to do. So going forward, I think that there are ways to understand the importance of this continuum and to figure out for particular issues how you want to strike the balance between professional practice, on-the-ground experience, and particularization. We ran into a lot of this in the design of marine protected areas off the coast of California, as you remember.
If we could have the next slide on science and adaptive management. This is our first slide dealing with a chapter per se. And as you'll see, it's pretty straightforward with the comments.
And in this case, you're just summarizing the comments received and then your judgments or your conclusions on how it all fits together?
This is a sifting of lots of comments and pulling forth ones that seem to represent quite a few people's concern. Right. And under comments, and then down below we look at the fifth draft and see what sort of what's there or what's changed. So, starting with the comment on kudos for excellent description, people really like Chapter 2 as maybe the best discussion of adaptive management they've ever seen. But then they go on to say, well, yeah, but where is it in Draft 5 of the plan? We don't have. I know there may be more adaptive management being brought in later, but as of Draft 5, it doesn't really read as an adaptive management plan. And the management side of Chapter 2 is seen as weak. So there's a lot of science about monitoring, about how one's supposed to go about the practice of adaptive management, but many readers were in the dark as to how the heck they would take these good ideas and apply them to their line of work. And they need guidance and ask for it in the comments. And so over the last one over on the right of my action should be exempt, that's one thing they would ask for is we don't understand it. If we do understand it, we don't think it applies very well to the kind of work we do. We already know pretty much what we're doing based on years of doing levies or whatever it is. So we should be perhaps exempted. Two critical issues came out, and that is if you don't have adaptive management in the plan, other than the textual description, you're going to be reviewing BDCP and Fish and Game's recommendations on that, which has a lot to do with science and adaptive management. And as I understand it, BDCP got some criticism in terms of the lack of an adaptive management strategy. So I'm wondering, and I'm parroting some of the commenters, how will science advise your decisions, and how are you going to use science and adaptive management in your determinations of consistency if you don't have policies to back that up? So I see that as a big gap. So in the fifth draft, you have no policies whatsoever. So it provides no basis for considering science or adaptive management in your consistency reviews, which I think is a serious issue. Joe, did you want to?
Yeah, I want to add in, I think that was a decision, rightly or wrongly, to have the policy on adaptive management incorporated into the governance policy in
Okay.
Chapter 3. So it actually does require it of all ecosystem and water projects, but it's not in Chapter 2, it's in Chapter 3. That may be something that at some point the council will want to change to make it clear by putting it in Chapter 2.
Yeah, there's the question of whether you should restate policies. Let's say, as you say, there's one in governance that you do mention this. And there's a question as to whether it would be a good idea to also restate that in Chapter 2 so that the Chapter 2 stands then as the buttressing of that idea as opposed to laying it all on governance per se. And you had a discussion before we started on the EIR, and we do need to wait until all those comments are in. However, I did look at the EIR in terms of the project description and so on, not in conjunction with what we're doing here, but just out of curiosity. And the EIR tends to treat recommendations and policies pretty much the same, even though the policies are enforceable regulations and the recommendations may or may not ever happen, which gives you quite a bit of latitude in that sense, being able to move back and forth between policies and recommendations without fearing too much as to whether these were covered or not under the EIR. And as you point out, the EIR is so broad, well, that's helpful to us right now. Okay, you're the next one, I think. Oh, no, is it me again? No. Okay, Chapter 5. We're jumping to... No,
let me do
Chapter
governance
4.
and
Sorry,
water.
we skipped over 4.
Do these in order.
What about 3?
I'm sorry, was there a question? Yeah, we're going to do Chapter 3.
Yeah.
Bob, I just moved forward here. I'm sorry. We're going to do Chapter 3. On governance, I'm going to do governance and water. We're splitting these up for who took the lead in a specific chapter. So I took the lead on governance and water, and also on finance, which we don't have a slide on, but I'm happy to talk about. And of course, we worked collaboratively to make certain we weren't too crazy in our comments. The slide has some very summary comments on Chapter 3, but it's worth noting first the intense conflict about the governance powers of the council, and this is the guts of the foundation, if you will, of who you are, and then the specifics of where you apply these powers gets worked out in the other policy chapters, if you will, water supply, reliability, ecosystem function, etc. But the large divides I've already mentioned earlier in conversation in response with Mr. Nordhoff, but whether you're a regulatory coordinating agency, the scope of activities covered, what types of activities, and your geographical reach, were you limited just to the Delta or beyond? And then there had been a lot of discussion about your processes for consistency review, and even though this analysis focused just on the staff drafts, having been involved in some of the earlier work of the council and before that Dell division, there was a similarity in comments and in authorship, etc. But the discussion of consistency review was particularly acute and focused when you adopted the process for consistency review, which was before you launched the draft plan process. So that in some sense was done. The council had adopted its processes, but there was a lot then of, well, what's this mean and how does it work out, and a lot of comments to that. And
You're referring to our adoption of the appeals rules in
Yes.
2010 pursuant to the statute which says we have authority to adopt emergency or whatever they're called rules.
Yes,
Yeah.
That's right. So in some sense, I'm just acknowledging that process has been completed, but some of the issues about what it really meant and how to be it implemented carried over into the discussion of the staff drafts. The fifth draft retains, in my judgment, 3 bullets here. Your responsibility to develop a Delta plan with regulatory elements. In other words, the broad attack on is there any regulatory authority, this staff draft, the last draft includes regulatory elements. Similarly, you've not limited your geographic reach to just the geographical delta, but you have various policies and recommendations extend out to match what you're seeking to achieve and what your interpretation of your authority is. and the key processes for consistency review are, in my judgment, in place. Now, having set that as the start, the analysis has more details in it, and I don't know how much to go into the detail.
Well,
So maybe I could get your guidance on how much detailed conversation you want about this.
If there are any highlighted points in the text of your memos that you think are particularly relevant, you may want to flag them for us. But the slideshow is following the structure of your memo pretty well, and most, and I'm following the thing too. But John, I think it's just, if there's something that jumps out of you that's mentioned only in the text, it's worth highlighting if you think it's worth highlighting. And then, of course, if members have questions, they're going to interrupt whenever.
Yeah. I would say that on page 11 of the, now turning to the report, the analysis, page 11 of the document which analyzes changes, because there's now a single policy in Chapter 3, and of the fifth staff draft, and the language has broadened, and so it's actually my interpretation of the reach of this language in the fifth draft is broader than it was in draft 4, as an example, and maybe broader in draft 3, and I only brought draft 5 with me. I don't have the other two in front of me. And so I want to acknowledge, sort of observe what I believe to be the intent of this language is to establish the ability to think about your core authorities with the co-equal goals, and you have additionally brought in language that those bringing forward covered actions have to basically certify that they're complying with other existing applicable laws. And that gets you some of the integration with other activities that we're flagging as an important issue. This framing of your consistency review and your covered action responsibilities does encourage integration. And so that would be the only one of these that I would flag specifically.
Okay. Felicia?
Question. I mean,